In our next four examples, what we're going to do is look at how to use the Drupal Ajax library. The Ajax library provides a set of utilities that allow us to write a complete Ajax application without having to write any JavaScript code. Of course, we'll probably need to augment the infrastructure that's supplied by the Ajax library if we want to make our application feature-rich, but the basic infrastructure is there. The bulk of the library has to do with how to create dynamic forms, but there's a subset of functions and utilities inside the library that allow us to work with HTML outside of forms. If you're unfamiliar with working with Ajax, the basic idea is that we can create a dynamic interface that allows the user to interact with the server without refreshing the page at all. So instead, what we can do is refresh certain sections of the page and make calls to the server behind the scene to send data and fetch data back from the server. This allows a more seamless interface that's more like a desktop application, and it's often a lot quicker to do it this way rather than refreshing all of the resources required for every page load. Using the Ajax library requires a 5-step process. First of all, we need to include the library, and we'll do so a little differently than we included our other libraries. Next, we need to set up a place where our content will be refreshed. So this is in an instance where we're sending a message to the server and we're expecting something back and we need to display that to the user. So we need to set up a container where that new content can display. Third, we need to set up a link or some element that will cause the Ajax call to be triggered. And finally, we need to set up a page that will return content based on that JavaScript call, based on that Ajax call, to either replace the content inside of that container that we defined in the second step, or to show a page if JavaScript is not loaded. So that page needs to display some similar content, or at least explain to the user why their interaction didn't work properly. This first example will demonstrate all of these steps in a very simple format. So go ahead and open up the 13th step, which is called Simple Ajax Example, and this is for the Interact module file. Go ahead and copy the entire code and paste it over the code that's currently in your .module file and save it. Okay, so let's go ahead and scroll up to our Interact Examples page. Now, this is a menu callback that we've used in previous examples, and there's code here that's commented out from our previous examples. Here's where the first step happens, and we're using Drupal Add JS to add a file called Ajax.js, which is in the mis directory. Now, because this isn't defined by a module as a library, we need to use Drupal Add JS directly to add it in. One benefit to Drupal Add JS is that if multiple functions add this file through Drupal Add JS, it will only include it once in the final rendered HTML. Okay, so this is the first step. We got our library. Our next step is to define a place where our change will occur. So I'm going to jump down here to our render array where we have a single item defined called Ajax Example that has a type of markup. So this will contain just some HTML markup. And we have a div here with an ID of change me. And there's some content in here that says this is some text that should get changed. So having an ID or a class for this markup is important so we can identify it when we return the data from our Ajax call. So this is our container. Our next step is to create the link that will generate the Ajax call. And that's what we're doing right here. A link that triggers an Ajax action is constructed the same as any other link, except it's got two special properties. So you see here that we're using the L function, and we're giving it some text, click me to replace content above, and we're giving it a path, interact/Ajax callback, and we're adding a special parameter at the end of this as a parameter that will get passed to the menu callback called Node.js. Now the idea here is that the Ajax library will change this to read Ajax instead of Node.js. And so when it gets clicked, if JavaScript is enabled, then Ajax will get passed as the first parameter to the menu call. If not, then Node.js will get passed as that first parameter. So then our menu callback knows whether Ajax is enabled and we're returning from Ajax, or whether this is actually a menu callback and we're rendering an entire page. The second property that's unique is that we're giving it a class here of use-ajax. And this tells the Ajax library to perform this special action to check for the Node.js and replace that with Ajax and add some additional behaviors to this link. This is a simple array of settings for the L function where we're setting this class. So if you want to learn more about the L function or the T function, which is used here for the text, you can check out the developer's tips and tricks video. Okay, so there's our link. So we have our library, we have our container, we have our link. Now the next step is to create a menu callback, which has the path of this link here, interact/ajax-callback, and define some logic that will behave differently depending on whether Ajax is enabled or not. So let's go ahead and jump to our hook menu where we've defined this new item. So the path here is interact/ajax-callback. And this is a pretty straightforward implementation of an item in hook menu. It's got a title, a description. The page callback is interact Ajax callback, and we'll take a look at that function next. And then we're setting a theme callback, and this is really the only difference here. And the idea here is that the page that's being called to return our Ajax content might by default be rendered with a different theme. So for example, we might be grabbing a page that's in the admin section and returning some content from that. And if so, by default, that will mean that all of the CSS and JavaScript that gets loaded for the admin theme will get pulled into our base theme as well. And most of the time, what we want to do is match up the content that gets pulled back with the content that already exists on the page. And so we can do that by specifying the theme where this page gets rendered by using the Ajax base page theme function. And then we're setting the access argument so that anybody can access this, and then the type to menu callback because we don't want a menu item for something that's going to be used as an Ajax callback. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the interact Ajax callback function. I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom of the page, and here it is. And you see we're taking a single parameter here, and this is the Node.js or Ajax that gets passed at the end of our path. And we're setting it to the type variable so that we can use it to distinguish between Ajax callbacks and non-Ajax callbacks. Let's go ahead and take a look at the non-Ajax callback first, simply because it's straightforward. The output here says this is what would be seen if JavaScript is not enabled. So we'll disable JavaScript and click this link so you can see what happens with this. And then we're just returning this as the output. If we're returning content for an Ajax call, then our return value is going to be a bit more complex. Ultimately, it's going to be a JSON object that contains various parameters that includes information like what element should be replaced or appended to, as well as the content that should be returned, and other information like what effect should be used to add that new content. We're going to start out by creating an empty commands array, and we're going to start adding commands. The idea of a command is that it performs a particular action, and we can add a series of commands in order to perform a series of actions. In this one, we're running Ajax command HTML, which runs the jQuery HTML function, and it takes as its first parameter a selector where that HTML function should be called. In this case, it's an element with the ID changeMe, which is what we added to our main menu callback. As a second parameter, it takes the content that should replace this item here. Now keep in mind that if this matches multiple elements, that all of them will be replaced by this content. Now I'm going to jump to this definition of Ajax command HTML. In my editor, I can hold down Control and click it, but you can also do a search using grep or a similar find utility to search for function space Ajax underscore command underscore HTML and then an opening parenthesis to find the definition. Now this is the ajax.inc file, and you see here that there are a multitude of different commands. So this is our command HTML, but if we scroll up, you'll see we have Ajax command replace, which is like HTML, but it replaces the wrapper as well as the internal content. We have insert, which is similar to HTML. We have alert, which will trigger an alert, and we'll look at that in just a little bit, and so on. So if you want to look at what's available to you, you can take a look at this file. If there's a way in your editor to look at the names of the functions, for example, I can click on the bottom here and see the number of different functions that are available. You can see the different methods that you can use to replace content or add new content to an existing element. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the module file. Once we have our series of commands in our command array, what we're going to do is pass this as a render array to the Ajax Deliver function. So we're taking the page and we're passing in an array, and the type we're giving it is Ajax because this is going to be an Ajax callback and we want to make sure to prepare the content for that. And then we're passing the commands to it as the commands parameter here. Finally, we run this page through Ajax Deliver, and this will take care of rendering our content in an Ajax-friendly way. So again, what we're doing here is checking for the type and running this if the type is Ajax. And remember, this gets passed at the end of our path. And if it's not, then we can just return the value as if it was a regular page load. Okay, let's go ahead and see this in action. Make sure to save your module file and then jump back to your browser. And we need to clear our caches in order to get our new page callback to register in our menu registry. Okay. Now I have a link down here that says click me to replace content above. And when we click this, it should replace this content right here. Okay, let's go ahead and give it a try. Okay, I clicked it, and now the content has changed to this is some new content. All right, now let's take a look at what happens when we click this link when JavaScript is disabled. So what I'm going to do is disable JavaScript, clicking this button down here. You can use a variety of tools to disable JavaScript in your browser, but this is one a plugin called Quick Java, which allows us to disable certain features of the browser, including JavaScript and Flash, with just a simple click. So I'm right down here at the lower right-hand corner of the screen. Okay, now I'm going to refresh the page. And I'm going to go ahead and click the link. So notice that the path is interact/ajax-callback/node.js. So when our link was rendered on our page, since JavaScript was disabled, this Node.js wasn't replaced with Ajax. And so then we can use that in our menu callback to return the content as if this was a normal page load. And so we're doing that and returning the content. This is what would be seen if JavaScript is not enabled. If we jump back to our code, we'll see right here our content is being returned, and it's being returned if the type is an Ajax. So we could easily say if type equals Node.js, run this code right here. One thing that I alluded to earlier when we were talking about the theme callback parameter in our addition to hook menu is that JavaScript and CSS that get returned from our Ajax callback also get added to the page. And this is pretty cool. It means that we can dynamically add JavaScript libraries or additional CSS, but it also means we have to be careful about what we return, which is why we wanted to make sure that the theme that was being used to render our Ajax callback was the same as our current theme.